Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
From the wisdom of the ancients to the music of Kid Rock, conservative columnist David Brooks reflects on the state of politics and our nation's state of mind. Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Later in the program, the best Valentine's Day reads. Whether you're looking for a steamy romance or a scorched earth relationship memoir, we get extra hot takes from several local bookstore owners. And a chance to make real strides in the fight against bigotry. We'll tell you about the Race Against Hate 5K. But first, just weeks after vacating one of the most high-profile pundit seats in American journalism, longtime New York Times columnist David Brooks comes to Jacksonville. In addition to his work as a best-selling author and a weekly political commentator on the PBS NewsHour, Brooks has written for the Wall Street Journal, the Weekly Standard, the New Yorker, and the Washington Post. His next stop is The Atlantic, where he'll work as a staff writer and a podcaster. Brooks speaks at UNF on Thursday, February 17th, and complimentary tickets are available on the World Affairs Council Jacksonville website. We recently had a chance to sit down with David Brooks to talk about his next move and the state of the nation. Let's take a listen. David Brooks, welcome to First Coast Connect.
It's good to be with you.
It's great to have you. You recently left what is arguably one of the most influential jobs in journalism, a columnist for the New York Times. You've been there for 22 years to move to The Atlantic. And in your farewell column, you joked that you were leaving because you'd accomplished everything that you'd set out to accomplish as a conservative columnist. But I'm curious, what do you feel your legacy is there at the New York Times? And tell us a little bit about your reasons for making this jump.
Yeah, I mean, the political legacy is nil. I am a certain kind of Republican who harkens back to like Alexander Hamilton and Theodore Roosevelt, sort of a moderate Republican that believes in capitalism, but believes in using government to make more people have the access to become good capitalists. So it's a more moderate Republicanism. And when I started, I had hopes that there would be people who thought like me in power, and that turned out not to happen. And so I think it'll be up to another generation to restore what is a long history in American life of this sort of Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, John McCain style of republicanism. So that's not going anywhere, but it won't be with me. And I left because I think the problems in America and in the world are spiritual and cultural more than they are anything else. And that shows up in the loneliness statistics, the distrust statistics, the fact that 57% of college kids say they have no sense of purpose in their lives. And so I just thought I wanted to do something that would contribute to what I think is a renaissance. Colleges, universities, churches, schools are trying to rebuild the humanistic core of our country, our ability to see each other, our ability to behave with good character. And I wanted to be part of that.
So this will give you more time to delve into those issues, time to think about those issues, and perhaps take you off that, publishing grind of the New York Times. But it is also going to be a shift for people who are accustomed to your voice. You're now going to be doing a podcast of sorts. Are you still going to continue, for instance, to do the PBS NewsHour every week?
Yeah, I'll continue the NewsHour. I'll do some teaching at Yale. I'll do a lot of writing. I now write half-time for The Atlantic, so I'll write full-time for The Atlantic. But I think I made the shift in part because the daily grind, there's a big difference between, about the daily grind of journalism, but there's a difference between a newspaper writing and magazine writing. And I started out as a magazine writer. My best length was like 5,000 words. And when I got called to New York in 2003, and I was offered a job as a columnist, all the way up to this office where I knew the offer was going to come, I was telling myself, say no, say no, say no. You're a magazine writer, not a newspaper writer. And instead of saying no, I said, has anybody ever said no to the question, do you want to be a columnist in the New York Times? Like, has anybody ever turned you down? And the platform is so great and the institution is so great. They said, no one ever turns this down. And so I had a failure of courage, and I did it for 22 years. But the whole time I sort of knew I'm really a magazine guy. more than a newspaper person. So it feels a little like returning home.
I want to steal one of the questions that you talk about in How to Know a Person, your book, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen, which is, if the next 5 years were a chapter in your life story, what is the chapter going to be about?
Yeah, contributing to a cultural shift. And so we've had over the last 60 or 70 years a culture of rabid individualism. We had to get rid of the conformist culture of the 1950s. And so we had to break up that old collective culture. But the culture we've built today is very much me, me, me. It's very much autonomy. And so what you see is people, like the number of people who say they have no friends has gone up fourfold since 2000. The number of people who rate themselves in the lowest happiness category is up by 50% since 2000. And there are a lot of people in colleges and universities, but also churches and synagogues and mosques and nonprofit organizations who are addressing this problem. And I would just like to be part of that. I started a nonprofit about 7 or 8 years ago called Weave. And we take people who are working, serving the communities where they live, very local work, and we try to give them some money and some support. So it's lifting up that sort of person is like, I found it just tremendously rewarding. And then with this, I'll be trying to lift up the great teachers there are in colleges across America. Because I complain a lot about the universities, but in high schools and colleges, there are great teachers who are leading students through books. And they're talking about, what is justice? What does a good life look like? How do you find your purpose in life? How can you be ambitious without being a jerk? And I just I love talking to those people, and I would love to, give them some airtime.
What is your take on the challenges that universities are facing right now under this administration in terms of demands that are being made of them, financial or administrative, or even, content directives?
Yeah, it's been the weird time for schools and universities. It's been the worst of times and in some ways the best of times. And so the worst of times comes in the form of attacks on the funding model. One of the great things we have in America is all these research institutions who pioneer new drugs, who come up with new advances in this technology or that technology and do basic research. And to think that a lot of that is being gutted. And I know friends who are medical researchers, they're working on serious life-threatening disease and suddenly they get their funds cut off for no apparent reason. That is the worst of times. The best of times is a lot of universities, more than ever in my lifetime, have said, we got a little out of whack. We got a little out of whack ideologically. Universities have become almost monocultures of progressivism. And it's fine, there should be progressive professors, but a monoculture is never a good idea. And so I think they're trying to increase intellectual diversity, and that's certainly happening in Florida. And then they got out of whack in the loss of the humanistic core. The idea that, you don't go to a university just to get a job. It's not all about making money. You try to be transformed as a person. And I was transformed by my college, and I was taught how to ask big questions, how to fall in love with reading. And it changed my life. I'm out of school 40 years. I feel more touched by my faculty, teachers from 40 years ago today than I did the day they graduated. Because they instilled and inspired a kind of curiosity. And I may never be as learned as those people were, but after you've drunk the fine wine, it's hard to be settled with the Kool-Aid. And so I was really transformed by my college, and I'm grateful to all those teachers out there, high school and college at any level, who really transform the souls of their students, and they don't just dump pre-professional advice to them.
You are a conservative in a sense, but you've also been harshly critical of the Trump administration. And, you've written about where this road leads us. In January, you wrote about a crack up that you believe is coming. And you said that we're in the middle of at least 4 unravelings. You listed the post-war international order, domestic tranquility, or at least where ICE is bringing down their jackboots, as you worded it, the democratic order, due to attacks on the Fed independence and the Department of Justice sort of pursuing vendettas, and then President Trump's mind. You talked about these 4 unravelings, and I'm curious, do you see a road back for the norms, the institutions of this country, sort of the rule of law as we understand it, to be, prior to some of the incursions made by the Department of Justice at the behest of the president? I mean, what do you see as the road to return? Is there one?
Yeah, well, I think buckle your seatbelts for the next couple of years. That would be my advice. And I do that. I somehow all that was happening with ICE and all that set me to reading of historians of Roman tyranny, of the Caesars in the classical era. And the pattern is pretty clear. Once somebody bends toward tyranny, they don't suddenly bend back and become more moderate. I think I wrote in that the arc of tyranny bends towards degradation. They just get more carried away by lust for power. And so I think we're going to see that unraveling. But I'm a long-term optimist about the country because I've read American history. And every few decades or so, we go through what Samuel Huntington, the political scientist, called a moral convulsion. People get disgusted with established power. They want to chop everything up. People who are out excluded demand inclusion. They want to tear everything down. And these periods are brutal to live with or to live through. The 1770s, the Revolutionary period, 1830s, Andrew Jackson period, the Civil War was no picnic. The 1890s, when we were awash in political corruption, poverty, masses of immigration. The 1960s, people forget there were thousands of bombings on college campuses in 1969 alone. It was rough to live through that time. But each time we've come out of it. And what happens is, we have a certain culture in this country, a sort of shared environment that we built. And it works for a little while. And then it stops working and people want to tear it up. And those tearing up times, as I say, are brutal. But every time we come out of it, the late 1960s, if you think about the assassinations, the bombings, the brutal attacks, by 1975, everybody's into disco and est and new agey kind of stuff. And so the culture shifts and human beings are just creative. And we had a culture of radical individualism, as I say, for a couple decades. Now we're having a big fight about what sort of community we want to have. Social justice folks have a version. MAGA folks have a version. People like me in the center have a different version. And we're fighting over what kind of communities do we want to build. And it's tough. But eventually America has always come out of it, and I assume we will this time too.
Do you think in your years at the New York Times that you have in any way changed your view in terms of structural injustice or the role that it plays in people's lives? Do you feel that you have, I don't want to say evolved, but have you changed your perspective on that in your writing and in your thinking?
I probably have become more aware. I think I've certainly a lot less conservative than I was. When I came, I became a Reagan conservative because I believe the chief problem in society was lack of dynamism. And I thought you needed people like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher to make Americans and British society just more dynamic. And I think they succeeded at that. We became more dynamic societies. By the time you get to 2004, 2005, I think the chief problem in American society domestically is inequality. And when you start dealing with that problem, you begin to get a little more progressive because that's a problem progressives have just better answers for. And so I think I have shifted somewhat. On the matter of social justice, I would say that's been a gradual sense of enlightenment over 20 or 30 years. Of course, I grew up, my grandmother was president of the local NAACP back in the days when blacks and Jews had closer political alliances than they do. And I grew up in Manhattan. So it's not as if I was blind to the diversity of the country. But I would say the friends I grew up with, the black friends, have been increasingly more honest about what's going through their mind, and especially in the last 10 or 15 years. And I think that's been an education for a lot of us, not changing my mind, but hopefully giving us a greater understanding of what it's like to be black in America, Latino in America, gay in America. And to come to celebrate that pluralism. I just watched the Bad Bunny Super Bowl performance, and I thought, good for us. Like, you got to be a self-confident country if your dominant language is English and your Super Bowl performance, the greatest theatrical event of your year, is in Spanish, and is celebration of Latin culture. And I thought, good for us. We can celebrate each of our communities, and that's a sign of a somewhat self-confident country, I would say.
Although there certainly was a counterpoint to that was presented from people who did not enjoy that celebration and, in fact, did a counter-programming.
Yeah, this is the problem with the Republicans. All I got is Kid Rock.
They got Ted Nugent, too. So
They have Ted Nugent. And this is when I was at my most conservative, one of the nice things was all the musicians I listened to were left. And so I didn't mind that. So it helps you broaden your repertoire of emotions when you're hardcore conservative and all your friends that you're listening, that you love their music, they're calling for a socialist revolution.
In addition to your own change and your time at the New York Times, a lot of people have written about your departure, saying that they too have changed with you in their experience. And I thought there was a really interesting column by Thomas Fox in the National Catholic Reporter, said that, it took some time for him to appreciate your writing, but that he has come to really value your perspective. And one of the things that he talked about was that you have been writing against the grain of the culture. He said, this culture of ours, which is trained to prize resume virtues over eulogy virtues, which I thought was a really interesting way to kind of look at the work that you've done, because your moral universe and sort of the world that you envision and hope for us to move towards really is more about the eulogy virtues. Can you just explain a little bit about how you think our moral identity is maybe askew, that compass?
Yeah, the distinction I made between the eulogy and the resume virtues came from a book I wrote a few years ago called The Road to Character. And the basic idea is that the resume virtues are the things we teach that make us good at our job, whether a good doctor, accountant, lawyer, or whatever. And the eulogy virtues are the things they say about us after we're dead, whether honest, courageous, capable of great love. And my core theory was, we all know the eulogy virtues are more important, but what do we pay more attention to in our schools and in our homes? We emphasize the resume virtues. And there's been a great loss, in my view, of moral knowledge. And I've spent the last few years increasingly trying to figure out how this happened and how we can recover a moral sense that the country really did have. There's a historian named George Marsden who said that, I'm going to paraphrase, what gave Martin Luther King's rhetoric such force was his belief that there's good and evil woven into the natural fabric of the universe, that segregation and slavery and rape and things like that are not just wrong sometimes, they're wrong all the time. They're into the fabric of the universe. But I think over the ensuing decades since Martin Luther King was alive, we've sort of privatized morality. We've told people to come up with their own values. And when you do that, first of all, most people can't do that because unless your name's Aristotle, you can't come up with your own moral philosophy. You got to inherit it from the accumulation of wise people who came before you. But second, we lost a shared moral order, a shared sense that we have some core agreements in our society of what morality looks like, what a good life looks like, what a bad life looks like. And once you privatize morality and there's no shared moral order, then we don't have a community. Because we can't trust each other if we can't have some agreement on what the right thing to do is. And we can't have a sense of security if everything is moral anarchy. And so you get to the point where people look, and I'll get a little partisan here, people look at Donald Trump's behavior and they don't see anything wrong. And I think that comes from a decades-long shared loss of moral order. And I've spent the last few years here in my most recent book, How to Know a Person, trying to figure out how can we behave decently to each other. And I don't demand that we behave heroically, Joan of Arc or Dorothy Day, but just to be considerate of each other in the concrete circumstances of life. My students that I talk to in their private lives, a lot of people don't know how to have a breakup conversation. They don't know how to sit with someone who's depressed. They don't know how to sit with someone who's grieving. And unless you teach those basic social skills of how to be considerate, you can forget the grand morality. We're just not going to be sensitive to each other in normal life.
In terms of the world of journalism, it does seem that it has been difficult for media, generally speaking, to absorb and react timely just to the pace of developments, particularly under this administration. And, some of that appears to be sort of strategic. I know that Steve Bannon talked about that kind of, fire hose almost of change makes it almost paralyzing, I think, for some people to react in real time. We've seen just, recently as well, these large scale firings at the Washington Post. I just wonder if you could kind of reflect on how you think the world of media is prepared to cover these important stories as they're happening and how it's doing.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump just needs to keep the show running. And sometimes I think even when he does something like a big foreign policy event like capturing Maduro from Venezuela, he just needs events to keep the show running. He just wants to be the center of attention every day. And so that's, I think, exhausting to the country. But also it puts us on this churn of outrage and counter outrage that doesn't change anybody's minds and get lost in the big picture. And so one of the things, frankly, to step back, one of the advantages of stepping back from my Times column is the ability to say, well, why did Donald Trump arise? Why is there a Donald Trump in countries like ours everywhere in the world? There are global populists pretty much everywhere. How much is he right about? He's never completely wrong. When he picks an issue like the universities or whatever, his diagnosis is never completely wrong. He tends to overreact. And he pick on an institution that's suffering, and he wants to destroy it instead of fix it. But he's never completely wrong. And then how do we get out? And so these, I think, are more questions of cultural change before political change. It was a cultural revolution that produced Donald Trump. It'll be a cultural revolution, a shift in values and spirit, in ideas, that'll produce whatever replaces Donald Trump. And so to me, it's in the realm of ideas and culture where I think I'm best suited. And God bless the journalists who are covering Trump day to day or covering events day to day. That God knows we need that. But for me, maybe I'm just getting old, but I thought I want to take a look at the big questions, the permanent questions that never go away.
Well, we very much look forward to your next chapter and also for your appearance here in Jacksonville. It's a Global Issues Evening with David Brooks. It's presented by the World Affairs Council, Tuesday, February 17th at 7 p.m. at the University of North Florida at the UNF Arena. David Brooks, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
I am looking forward to my trip to Jacksonville.
All right. We look forward to it as well. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back. Well, whether you are interested in a steamy romance or a scorched earth memoir, we are talking to a pair of local bookstore owners for their hot takes on Valentine's Day reads. Here with their recommendations for books and gifts for others, we are joined by Rona Brinley, owner of the Bookmark in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Rona.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. I'm going to be scooching a little bit, both of you. Dana Shutters, owner of Happy Medium Book Cafe in Riverside. Thanks so much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right, I'm going to start. Rona, what makes a good Valentine's Day read? What are the criteria that you considered when choosing your list?
Well, I actually think that a good Valentine's read is a book that other person is going to love and enjoy. And while I brought books about love, because you never can go wrong with a book about love for Valentine's Day, I think that the ultimate thing is to show that you know that person well enough that you can find the right book for that person, whether it's a book about love or it's a mystery with a dead body. I mean, if that's what they like, you show, well, I know you well enough, and I'm going to pick a book that's specifically for you that I know you will enjoy.
Yeah. Dana, does your idea of a Valentine's Day book recommendation necessarily have to be romantic?
No, not necessarily. It would be, again, a book that you loved to read and you, again, know that person well enough to suggest that book for them. They would love it too.
What about for your own selves? What do you look for? Do you find this time of year you're turning to a book that is got some sort of connection to Valentine's Day?
I would say no, because I'm constantly reading a variety of books for the store. But I do look at for a book about love or romance when I'm looking for a break from reality, which a lot of people do that as well.
Yeah. And romance has really taken off, Rona, just as a genre. There was a really interesting piece
Yeah.
about AI and romance books that the New York Times did recently. And they can be a little formulaic, but they are also, their fans are legion and they sell like crazy. So what is happening with just the genre of romance books?
Yeah, it is one of the fastest growing genres, and a lot of bookstores are opening that are niche bookstores, just romance bookstores. And a romance will always promise you a happily ever after. I mean, you're not going to, and when you say specifically for Valentine's Day, I wouldn't provide something depressing. I mean, it's like, I love you, here, go on and slit your wrist after reading this book. That's not a good idea, but they do offer that, and it's very different from the old days. When you think about romances in the grocery store that had bodice rippers and a guy in a kilt on the front cover, for $7.99, those days are over. Romance books now are better written. They're more serious, so they shouldn't be written by AI, and they're not as formulaic. The only thing that's required is it has a happily ever after ending, but they are not as formulaic. They're much better written than they used to be.
Uh-huh.
And people who are good readers, not just I'm hiding this in a brown paper bag kind of readers, tend to go to romance or even romantasy, which is a combination of fantasy and romance.
Yeah, which is also a big trend. And then
Big
there's
trend.
all of this kind of people, Dana, who are choosing romances that are on a specific topic,
Mhm.
particularly like a sports topic. We've heard about the hockey romance that's
Yes.
been dominating book lists everywhere. What gets people into that narrow of a interest, a niche group?
I think it's particularly they'll start a series and then they will continue that series and they know that they enjoyed that particular book, so they will continue with um that particular
Author in that
author and
style.
that yeah. So if they read one hockey romance that they liked, they're going to try another hockey romance. So I think that's how that happens.
Yeah. So I thought it was interesting. We asked you to select books that you would recommend, and I want to go through them all, but I thought it was really interesting. And we'll put them on our website after the program so that you can dial back and look if you miss one. But you guys both chose as your first book the same book, which I couldn't think of a better recommendation from two local bookstore owners. It's called This Book Made Me Think of You by Libby Page. Tell us about it.
Well, it is the perfect book, and I think we both picked it because it's the perfect love story, and it's a perfect love story about books and the power of books in that area and to help you heal. It's about a woman whose husband is dying, and she used to be a reader, and she can't read anymore. And before he dies, he meets with a local independent bookseller, and he says, after I go, I want you to provide a book once a month to my wife for a year after I die. Things that will help her heal and get her kind of back into the world and back into reading. And so she gets a surprise call from some guy who says, I have a book for you, and I don't know what you're talking about. And each one comes with a note. And so it's a wonderful love story. And it is a wonderful homage to the power of a book to heal this woman. And I think one of the interesting things to do, if you want to do it as a Valentine's present, you don't have to die to do this, but you could pick a book a month and, like we have a subscription club where we do that. But if you want to say that this is the book I think you should read and give your Valentine, a book every month, and what would that list be? Or just give them the list of what you think that book might be.
Oh.
It's a real act of love.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
A way to translate that into something, tangible.
Right.
In terms of the story, I know that the author, Libby Page, Dana, has said that she was in some ways inspired by the movie You Got Mail for this book, but she wanted a different outcome. She found it very unsatisfying that the small bookstore owner in that movie ends up giving up her book or having her bookstore taken over by this giant chain. And she wanted to preserve the bookstore. And I wonder if there isn't a little appeal for both of you guys and the fact that it's centered around a bookstore, a local bookstore, and the owner.
Yes, and in the story, he does have some troubles and the struggles of owning an independent bookstore. And I won't tell you the ending, but it now that you bring that up, there is definite connections. And as a bookstore owner, you definitely can relate to what he's going through and things like that.
And what was it that appealed to you about the read? Was it the book connection? Was it the love story? What makes it for you rise to the level of that top choice?
It was all of it, and I thought it was such a sweet gesture that her dying husband did for her, and it was clever and a different take on a love story, and I just really liked it. And the books he chose for her were so thoughtful, and there was such a variety, and each one just had another clever take to her life and her healing process.
So Rona, I almost feel like it's cheating because there's another bookstore owner book on your list. This is The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery by Gabrielle.
Oh, that was
Seven.
mine.
That was mine.
That was yours.
Although I would concur.
Okay.
Full steam ahead with that one. Yes.
Okay. So again, it's a bookstore owner, and I'm sure there's a little bias in there in selecting the book because it must speak to you and your heart in a way.
Well, yes, absolutely. And when you asked me about this, I, have so many books flowing through my head. So I was just the ones that I really remember, and it was a long time since I've remembered that one,
Okay.
but or read that one. And right after I read it, I went and watched the movie because I wanted to know immediately what they did with the book. But again, that's kind of like a grumpy bookstore owner that is going through loss and so forth. And it actually, now that I'm mentioning it, like has a lot of similarities, but just very heartfelt. And I definitely could relate to it being a bookstore owner as well.
Rona, one that landed on your list is one that we've actually talked about on this program before, The Jackal's Mistress,
Right.
which is one that you have strongly recommended. And so I think that that's a given that people should pick that up with a Rona recommendation. One on your list I hadn't heard of. It's by Maureen Gu, and it's called One and Only. Tell us a little bit about that.
One and Only. That's a really cool one. And that is a romance and a happily ever after, because this is the story of a woman who she has this amazing power. She can read who your one and only is. And so she's a matchmaker with 100% success rate. And except for herself, she knows the name of the person she's supposed to be mated with for life by fate. And she's now turning 40 and she just can't find him. She's got his name and she can't find him. So she decides that weekend for her 40th birthday, she's going to have a fling. And, because this is fiction, you have to suspend reality. So the guy she has a fling with, who is much younger, works for the guy who she's fated to be in love with. And so
she
now
finally meets him.
Yeah, but now she's got a conundrum here.
Now
Does
it's
she follow
complicated.
her heart of the moment, or does she follow the rules of fate? And so it's this interesting triangle. But since it's romance, it's going to have a happily ever after. But it's got some good twists in it, so it makes it more fun.
One book that is on your list, Dana, is called The Love Haters, which is funny. I mean, it sounds like the reverse of what we're talking about. Tell us a little bit about the plot of Love Haters. And this is an author that is also pretty prolific.
Yep. That is Catherine Center's book. It was the first book I read by Catherine Center. It's two people that are competing for the same job of writing someone's book, and they go down to Key West, and then they meet and they're competing, and of course there is a happily ever after. But the reason why I put that on the list is because after I read that book, I immediately read 3 more books about Catherine Center. It was really she just feel good, funny rom-com. And I really enjoy her writing, and that is she's a great relatively quick read, and always going to have a happily ever after.
And funny, too.
Funny, yeah. It was a good rom-com.
So there is another book about 2 people coming together, competing for, in this case, writing a memoir. This is called Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. And it's a historical fiction romance, and it takes place in Georgia, which is close, next door. But it's about 2 journalists, I guess, that are competing to become the biographer of a celebrity.
Well, Emily Henry, like Catherine Center, is a very popular rom-com author, and I really enjoyed her book. Other books by her, Happy Place and The People We Meet on Vacation, which is very popular on television right now. And again, there's a happy ending. These people are competing for a similar job, and of course, there's a happily ever after in it. But Emily Henry, another great rom-com author that is extremely popular at the store.
And this has a little bit of mystery too, right? They're able to try to piece together this real story of this heiress as opposed to the story perhaps she once told.
Absolutely. And that's when I like a romance, that I do like a romance that has another story in it, like a mystery or so forth. Yeah, so that was definitely an appeal.
We All Live Here by Jojo Moyes. Tell us about that book, why it is that you found that. This is the same author as Me Before You,
Yeah.
which is another very popular romance and bestseller.
Jojo Moyes is one of my absolute favorite authors. I think that she does the best job at character development We All Live Here is about a woman. She's in her 40s. She's recently divorced. She has teenage children. She has aging adults or aging parents. And then her husband is having um, had an affair and left her and so forth. And he's going through having a new baby with this other woman. So there is like so much drama, and she is piecing her life back together, finding love again. And there is, our happy ending. But I mean, I laughed, I cried. I recommended this book to so many people, and it just came out in paperback this week. So I just absolutely love it. And you could tell by coming into the store because there's a giant stack of them. And that was probably one of my favorites of last year.
We All Live Here. Great recommendation. Speaking of midlife, all kinds of crises piling up, there's a book that you are recommending for Galentine's Day, which is the celebration of friendship between women. It's called Clutch. It's by Emily Nemens. Tell us about it.
Yeah, because we had talked about a Galentine's Day possibility, and this is the friendship of 5 women who went to college 20 years ago, and they, believed in the dream when they said, come to college and meet friends that last forever. And they did, and they all have very different lives. They're all very successful in one way or another, but they're all facing some crisis. One is going through IVF, trying to have a baby. One is trying to decide a political career. One has problems with husband. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on. And so they get together for a reunion. And the question is, and it's really the question for any friendships, is how much can you give to the other person without losing yourself, and to be a good friend? And so I think, when you think about Valentine's Day and spending it with your best friends, that's the important thing, is that they're there for you and that you care about each other. And it's a great day to celebrate that.
That's a nice recommendation. When it comes to real life romances, there's one on your list as well, which I think is great. It's called From Eras to Ever After, Love Notes from Taylor and Travis. It's a book by Bella Montgomery, but of course it's a story that we're all really familiar with, Taylor Swift.
It is, and I just couldn't resist because, I'm not a huge football fan, and I'm not a Swiftie, but I do admire Taylor Swift immensely. I think she's an amazing woman, an amazing, success story. But this is a love story that the whole country really couldn't resist. And so, it starts off with the friendship bracelets that he wanted to give her. And every chapter, I mean, it's sort of beautifully put together. And every chapter is love is. And then it says what it is that you're there for each other, that, is better than fiction. So love is always something, and there's a picture. It's a great gift, and it has a local connection. I don't know if you all know this, but Kindred Lubeck, who is the daughter of Jay Lubeck, the jeweler across the street from the Bookmark, who's been there forever, is also a jeweler in New York, and she designed their engagement ring.
That's right.
So she grew up at the beaches, and so she's part of the love story. It just makes it an even better love story for me, and it's just beautiful. I just couldn't resist.
I think that would make a great gift for Swifties, certainly. You also had a recommendation for a gift simply based on, as you said, picking a book that somebody's going to enjoy. And you've got 2 favorites that you wanted to talk about, The Award by Matthew Pearl and The Architect of New York by Javier Moro.
Well, the award by Matthew Pearl. Matthew Pearl is an amazing author. He wrote the Dante Club, and this is a story of a writer. So again, it speaks to my heart. And he's having trouble finishing his first book, and he moves into an apartment upstairs from a very famous author, and he has great dreams that guy's going to become his mentor, and this is going to be his ticket to fame and fortune and wonderment. And the guy turns out to be a jerk, and he won't even look him in the eye, and makes him shovel snow and take out the garbage, and won't turn on the heat. And but then this author who can't finish his book finishes it, and he wins an award, and all of a sudden the dynamics completely change. But there's a huge twist, which of course I won't tell you, and everything just goes to hell, and you don't know what's going to happen, because Matthew Pearl knows how to write a mystery. This one is really good. It has a lot of really great twists in it, so
Excellent.
I highly recommend it for lots of reasons. Great writing and great mystery.
You recommended, Dana, Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and this is a queer love story, historical fiction, romance, but it is based in the NASA space shuttle system, or program rather, from the early 80s. It is a story of 2 women, who are attracted to each other in this male-dominated field, and it's not super spicy, but it is a good sort of diverse choice on our list of Valentine's Day reads.
Yep, it is extremely popular at the store, and sometimes I even avoid those popular books because they can sell on their own. But it is great historical fiction. this woman, she gets into these women who get into the space program. They're already competing with men and dealing with the stereotypes and so forth in this field. And then they end up falling in love. And then they have to hide their relationship if they want to basically save their career and stay in the program. And it is such a great story, again, another tearjerker, and not a spicy story, but definitely a love story that will really move you. And the fact that they were not able to be public about the relationship because of their situation was impactful.
Yeah,
So,
sounds like a very poignant book. So the flip side of Valentine's Day, you also had a recommendation for an anti-Valentine's Day read. These are people who just have nothing to do with this Hallmark holiday, perhaps are not interested in celebrating it. This is called They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. Tell us about it.
okay, so a confession, I have not read this book, but I sent it to all my staff and I said, we need one anti-Valentine's Day one. And this is a character, Dr. Scarlett Clark. She's an English professor, so she leads a secret life as a serial killer targeting abusive men at her university who have escaped punishment through the legal system. So that was the one they all voted would be the
Happy Valentine's Day to you, right?
the anti-Valentine's Day right there.
Right.
But
It's got a body count and it's a woman who's murdering problematic men.
yeah,
So it
problematic
is-
men.
I
Yes.
guess if you're not in the Valentine's Day mood, that is a very good choice. I want to leave on one that is a thriller, but also a very sad book, I guess, Broken Country by Claire Leslie Hall. And this is a woman who is rekindling a relationship with a former lover, but in a very, loving marriage as well. And so it's complicated. How did this land on your list?
This was one of my absolute favorites from last year. It's a love triangle. It's someone who is happily married in her life, but her first love comes back to her life, and she's very conflicted. There is another sad one. Again, I told you my love stories. I like having other stories in it. There's a mystery, and it is definitely one of my most recommended books. It's highly recommended, and I
Love
hope
it.
you love it.
Yeah. Broken Country. Well, we also, WJCT staff had some recommendations internally of books that they think people should read for Valentine's Day. Just briefly, that includes Twilight, The Notebook, Lord of the Rings, and Little Women. So those are the WJCT staff recommendations from the folks that we work with. We hope you have a great Valentine's Day. Please support your local bookstores. Rona Brinley from The Bookmark, Dana Shutters from the Happy Medium Book Cafe. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you, and happy Valentine's
Thank
Day.
you.
All right. Up next, making strides in the fight against bigotry and intolerance. We'll tell you how you can join the annual Race Against Hate 5K.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Accidents can happen when you least expect it. For decades, our attorneys have dug out the facts to help juries decide who's at fault.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com. Clay Today is a multimedia publication offering Clay County residents information on news, sports, business, and community updates. More information and details at ClayTodayOnline.com, Clay Today 904 on Instagram, and Clay Today Newspaper on Facebook. FSCJ Artist Series presents The Doo-Wop Project, Echoes of the Street, featuring Broadway performers delivering classic doo-wop harmonies with a modern twist. Friday, March 6th at Jacksonville Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets available at fscjartistseries.org.
Every morning, you turn to familiar voices, voices that help make sense of the day ahead. From NPR and WJCT News 89.9. Thanks for making us Jacksonville's most trusted morning companion.
What happens in our brains between life and death?
I woke up floating above the trees. Next to me was my father, who had died 20 years earlier. And he kept saying that I had to go back, but I was arguing, saying, no, it's so beautiful here. I really want to stay.
The brain at that darkest threshold. It's our series Brainwaves on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Less than a week in, the Winter Olympics have offered us spectacles in sports and in politics. A new NPR podcast is covering all the biggest stories out of Milan. We check in on their work on the ground and ask what makes these games unique. A Winter Games Roundup next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. A local initiative formed to unite the community against hatred and anti-Semitism kicks off its annual race next weekend. Here to talk about it is Heather Terrell, J Institute Director at the Jewish Community Alliance. Heather, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having us.
We're also joined by Eleanor Blair, Vice President of Strategic Communications and Connections at the YMCA of Florida's First Coast. Eleanor, nice to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, Heather, this is the third year of Together Against Hate, this initiative. Remind us a little bit about its roots, why this initiative was started, what was happening at the time.
Okay, so it was around the time that they had projected the anti-Semitic imagery on both the stadium and CSX building. And our CEO at the JCA, Adam Chaskin, and Eric Mann, the CEO of the First Coast YMCA, got together. They're old friends. And they were like, excuse me. They were like, we really need to do something, but not sure what. Let's bring our teams in and discuss this and figure out what we can do to combat this kind of hatred. And so that's when they brought in the JCA and the YMCA, and we started talking and brainstorming, and it's where we landed.
And so what was the conclusion of those conversations? What was the decision reached about what could help, what might advance the conversation, promote community unity, or fight some of these really ugly, hateful messages?
So we decided that we would have, it's usually a 5-part speaker series that happens September through January. And then in February, we do a 5K walk run. And so it's kind of a culmination, a visual display of seeing everybody come together and unify in the same message and mission. And we wanted to make sure that we were highlighting not just anti-Semitism, but other forms of hatred and bigotry that shows how similar these hatreds really are and how we're all so similar.
Heather, I want to come back to that because there is a part of me that thinks things are getting worse instead of better in some ways. And so I want to get your reflections on that, but I want to bring you into the conversation, Eleanor. First of all, what is the YMCA's role? Why join this partnership? How has it been for the YMCA as an organization to be a partner in this?
So the YMCA has been here on the First Coast for over 100 years. And, our role is to support our community, build stronger communities. And, our mission and our purpose is around being for all and always open to all. And so when Adam and Eric met and talked about this initiative, the partnership was strong. We felt like it was part of our work and social responsibility. And so we jumped right on board.
And it's sort of an interfaith alliance in some ways, too. Obviously, the YMCA has its roots and its name in Christian traditions. Mm-hmm. And this was a partnership in part to push back specifically on anti-Semitism, in addition to other forms of intolerance and bigotry, but with the JCA. And so it was sort of a cross-community alliance as well.
Absolutely. Our core values are built on Christian principles. So that is really where we felt like honesty, respect, responsibility. Those are all the core values that we hold dear, and also the JCA. And so we definitely partnered together, and we actually, especially our first year, had so many community partners in alliance with, an interfaith, One Jacks, 90 Forward. We had so many great partners that were interested in being part of our speaker series with us to talk about some really difficult topics, honestly, but needed education. We felt like building understanding was part of the solution. You don't know what you don't know. So it was helpful to create those topics and have discussion.
So, Heather, let's talk about the state of things, because there are a lot of ugly things happening right now in the world when it comes to the rise of white supremacy and all kinds of ugly incidents online, in the real world. How do you measure success? What are you seeing locally? Are you having an impact?
I would definitely say that we're having an impact. I think when we have people come up to us afterwards and thank us for either representing their community or for actually opening the door for educating them on something that they didn't understand, a lot of the hate comes from ignorance, and it's not because people are dumb. It's because they've never been exposed to another culture or another background. And so it's so important to do this work, because giving people that little kind of grasp of, this is what this culture brings to the table. And guess what? It's just like your culture. People are able to see the similarities, and I think it's really amazing.
So we should say, this is a way to show up if you are wanting to be seen protesting and, objecting to hateful messages. This is a 5K. It's a run walk. So if you don't feel like running it, you don't have to. There's also a fun run, but it's February 22nd, which is next Sunday. It's at the Winston Family YMCA. We've got a link if you want to sign up for the race on our website. You can, of course, go to the both websites to find more information. But we appreciate the work that you guys are doing. Thanks so much for coming on today and talking about it. Heather, Eleanor, thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
All right. That's our program. Thank you for listening. We encourage your feedback and suggestions, and you can submit either at firstcoastconnect.org. You can also find all our past and current shows, and while you're there, you can sign up for the First Coast Connect newsletter, which gives you a sneak peek at upcoming guests and a chance to submit questions in advance. Join us tomorrow when we discuss the week's top stories, from a panhandling lawsuit that's costing St. Johns County taxpayers to a state subpoena of Jacksonville's Hispanic outreach coordinator. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Congaree & Pen, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpen.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.